we had a few years ago. I don't know how many years ago, when we were talking about the idea of bringing the women, the clergy, the community and others to help with something, for us to come together. And I think that this has been such a wonderful format, and I really appreciate your efforts in bringing so many people and women together to show who we are and what we can accomplish. So thank you so much for including this in us and making this possible through the National Council of Jewish Women. And very happy to be here. Just a little bit of a few notes before we begin. Of course, I'm home, as many of us are. Maybe some of you are getting out into an office here or there, but there might be moments where a child walks by or needs me for a minute, and I might say to them, shh. So it's not to you, it's to them, but I might just stop and help them. So just giving that, to saying that. And also a reminder that this is a sacred space and a safe space for all of us. And even though we are digitally connected right now, that sacred part of what we are doing stays the same. So there isn't any comment that is that should be judged, and everyone is welcome to express themselves in the way that they can, in the way they feel is appropriate, and to be respectful of others' comments, and especially mine. Just kidding. It's hard not to hear like the snickers, I can see your faces, but in some pictures. So this is
I'm gonna
just not a format that I am used to working in, but
I'm gonna just break in for just a second. I'm so sorry. Right. So your screen is frozen, so we can't see you. Oh, there you go. There, you're back. Okay. Can everybody see Rabbi now?
Great. Oh no. Don't.
I can see you now. I can see you.
Can you hear me? Can everyone?
We can. So we can hear you.
But it wasn't for you.
But you're frozen. You're moving slowly, but we can hear you.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay.
Welcome.
Slowly is not normal for me, so this is it still frozen?
2, 3, 9, 2, 3, 2,
a little bit, yeah. You're moving slowly.
I'm not sure. Let me see, because you're moving slowly for me too, but let me text the other members in my family to make sure they're all off of their Wi-Fi.
Okay, yeah, it's a bandwidth issue. Thanks, Diane.
Yeah, I haven't had that yet, so let me just make sure.
And I'm just keeping everybody else on mute, so if you want to say something, if you would put it in the chat for now.
Sure. Yeah, everyone was frozen to me too, so that's why I was like, oh, I'm not even so funny, but it's just because of the bandwidth issue. Okay.
Well, while we're all on hold for just a second, I just want to say happy birthday to Rabbi Julie. It was your birthday, so just a shout out. Thanks, Lisa, for the reminder. Just wanted to mention happy birthday.
Aw, thank you, Lisa. And I can see you moving around. So I hope, if you have anything to say and you want to put it in the comments to respond, that's okay too. I hope that eventually the bandwidth gets better. I got a text from my husband saying he will pass the word to the teenagers to get off Wi-Fi. So hopefully that blessing will happen. So today we are going to talk about Chodesh. And I picked Chodesh for many reasons to talk about today. And the title, I guess, that got out there somehow from me was, women, and when women began to say the Chodesh. And I kind of want to maybe change that title or the subject to when women become Chodesh. So just put that in your mind for a minute there. Because saying Chodesh is one thing, and being Chodesh is another. So recently, I had the honor, the experience, the difficult moment in burying someone by myself. This pandemic has put us all into situations that are new and challenging and difficult, yet eye-opening. it was something that I really wasn't expecting ever to do. Somebody needed help. They didn't have family locally. The funeral director didn't have someone available and called me and said, would you come and help? And when I stood there, and there were two women with me at the time, and I was shoveling to bury someone by myself, I couldn't help but feel that immense humble feeling that I feel all through my life when I'm given a job or a work or life's work to do to honor someone else. It was an experience that was a devastating and beautiful at the same time. And with each shovel, I kept thinking about which member of the family I was helping at that time to do this honor for them. Which person was I being a part of for the living, and then who was this person, because I didn't know them, who was being buried. It was a very isolating, lonely feeling, and I didn't even at that time consider or think of or have any inclination in my mind that it was wrong or inappropriate to say it Kaddish. It was something that I felt that with my intention and in that position, I had to do no matter what. There wasn't a minyan to respond to this Kaddish. There were definitely no men around either to say the Kaddish. And I couldn't help but put in my mind that it wasn't about saying the Kaddish. It was about being at that time. What do we do in our lives that make ourselves holy enough to be worthy and to experience something or to help honor someone? It is beyond anything that I can even imagine. And it's so disheartening to me to see still texts online from different organizations not mentioning, I'm gonna say avoiding the idea that women can say and should say Kaddish. So I wanted to kind of go through the history of that a little bit with you, and talk about a woman who really made it public about the importance of saying Kaddish, and talk about different ways where we can be Kaddish. I wonder if there ever been a time for you where you have been in a situation where you were not included in a minyan or not allowed to say Kaddish. You can tell us. So I see Rabbi Robin, you're nodding. If you want to mute yourself and share that, I'd love to hear any particular. See some hands being raised.
I've had a few situations, but one that pops out for me is at the wall in Jerusalem, and not being able to sing or pray, and specifically with the mourner's Kaddish, not being able to be part of a minyan, and even being called not Jewish because I was trying to do the things that were against halakha, and it was very painful to not feel like I could be included and that I wasn't honored enough to do that. And that's, obviously my interpretation of it, but it was painful, very painful.
Sharon? Oh.
Mute, I guess. Okay, this actually isn't my story. It's my cousin Naomi Danis' story, but it resonates so strongly with me, and I think it's relevant to this conversation. When her dad, my uncle, passed away, she made a commitment to say at least one Kaddish, to participate in one Kaddish minyan every day. And she worked in Midtown Manhattan, and there were times that she'd have to find a minyan in Midtown because the morning and the evening minyans just didn't work for her time frame. And she'd find these Orthodox minyans that were in law buildings, and they just didn't know what to do. And a woman walked in and wanted to participate. So she'd be in the hallway or in the closet or on the other side of the door. And she participated. I mean, she's a trailblazer, but she did not feel welcome. She made herself participate, but she was, you know, an outside in this mitzvah.
Mhm. Yeah. Anyone else have anything? I saw Nancy for a second, but I don't know if you're all frozen or if I'm frozen.
I'm here if I can. So when I was in high school, unfortunately, my father's friend passed away. My friend's father passed away. And so we went to the funeral and then afterwards at their home for Shiva Minyan. And there weren't enough, and even they were not over observant. They personally, their family included women, but whomever was leading the Shiva Minyan did not consider women as part of a minyan. And so they went out to the neighborhood and just try to pull somebody off the street who was male and Jewish close enough to count. And I think that was a large part of what has led me to be such a Jewish feminist all these years.
These experiences that they're put in front of us are, you know, if we don't do the work to show that we are people who deserve the right to say words of thanksgiving, of praise, of universal peace. This is what the Chodesh is made of. The words of the Chodesh are made of those. So I'm going to read you quickly because I'm coming off of that, Nancy. Just if you're a Jewish woman and you want to know, can I say Chodesh? And you don't know a lot about the tradition and the history, and we'll talk a little bit about, you know, the Chodesh didn't come from the saying a mourner's prayer. It came from recited in a temple following the study of Torah. And legend has it that Rabbi Akiva encouraged one of his students who was grieving over the death of his father to recite parts of the Chodesh to redeem his father's soul. And beginning in the 6th century, the Chodesh was recited at funerals of scholars. And then later, so that not to bring shame on those who were not as knowledgeable, then the Chodesh was recited for all people. And then finally, in the 13th century, the mourner's Chodesh became part of Jewish ritual. So it doesn't date back too far. But if you go to, and I'm prefacing this, I accept everybody's place where they are in the world. But if you don't know the history and you want to go and you look at this up, one of the first things that pops up is a Chabad website. And it talks about the Chodesh, and it says it's a deeply meaningful prayer that expresses and reflects values of the Jewish people. Okay, I'll take that. The male mourner is obligated. Now, in tradition, it doesn't say that women are, we're not obligated, but we're not forbidden. I'm just going to put that in the background for a minute. And then it says, a stepson or an adopted son may recite, but not obligated. And then it said, if a relative has no sons, close male relatives have a responsibility to ensure that Chodesh is recited. So why it doesn't even mention women, and we can all assume or try to guess, or how to teach someone who goes to that website and says, oh, okay, well then, why can't I say the Chodesh? That, women, in tradition, one explanation for this is that exemption of women draws on the fact that women are exempt from all time-bound commandments, positive time-bound commandments. So, we were raising children, and these things that we should do, we shouldn't be obligated to do that, so it wouldn't take away from our other duties. But then in the 17th century, it was recorded that some women recited Chodesh at home, but not public. Deborah, you have a comment?
I was just going to tell a story about not being able to saying the Chodesh, but you've kind of moved beyond that, so it's okay. I can hold myself.
I'm sorry, what? I couldn't hear you.
I was just going to say a story when you had asked about women not being able to say the Chodesh. I was going to tell family story about that, but it seems like you're going past that, so that's okay. I can hold the story.
Okay, if you want to share it later, I'm happy to hear it later too.
Okay.
Or not. Okay. But there was another, there are so many stories, and there's stories about minyan being counted, and there are stories about Chodesh in particular. And the reason why I pointed this out is because how do we, if there are no men, and this is the rule, then how do we carry on this tradition? Where is that Lador Vador? Why are we still? I had a conversation with a friend the other day. We were talking about the Zoom and the Chodesh. Okay, and technically, when you're on Zoom, you don't hear the response for Chodesh, you're not really saying Kaddish because the 10 people can't hear and you can't hear them, right? So there isn't, unless you unmute everybody. And then so he said, well, so if you unmute everybody at that time, then we'll feel that halacha is okay, that you're gonna say the Kaddish and it will count. I'm thinking, well, on Zoom, when everyone talks at the same time, you can't hear anyway. But what does it mean really to hear the words of the Kaddish and who is hearing it and who is responding? If we're just saying the words to say the words, right? There's no really, what do you need a response for anyway if it's just by root? But if you're saying it because you are continuing a legacy or you're honoring someone and your response is felt from wherever you are. I was alone at that cemetery. There was nobody to respond to me. So then it brought me to think, well then, what is it about this particular prayer? What is it about it that causes us to have this conflict in our lives? And why can't we say it? Why can't we even say it alone? This is something for the living. This is a prayer that we say for us to have healing also, not only for us to honor those who passed, because there's so many different kinds of Kaddish. Kaddish Shalem, Kaddish Yatom, there's the Reader's Kaddish, all of these different moments for us to praise and be thankful. But at this particular moment, I think it's really something for us to think about in terms of what our role is and what our goal is and what our purpose is when saying these words. So if you're walking into an environment where the perception of the people who are there, even if right now we say, okay, we're not forbidden, we can choose to be obligated to say these prayers. To say this prayer, we can choose to be obligated. Let's go with tradition, and we're not obligated. We choose to be obligated because we're not forbidden. But we go into a situation like Rabbi Fisher or others who have been to a place where the people around you are not hearing your voice as a voice that counts in that particular prayer. So are they even responding to you anyway? So then I'm thinking, well, where is that response going to come from? The response has to come from myself first, right? That feeling or that knowledge that what we have to offer in these words and in this emotional time and in our action is the response itself. I want to see that response. I want to see that on every website that human beings, whether male or female, have an obligation to take these words and to be holy and to say them with conviction and with meaning and to be heard by themselves in order to be heard by others. So I'm going to read you a little bit of a background. I'm finding it here as my eyes are going up and down. Here we go. All right. So is it enough to say the Kaddish in a private setting on our own, to be pushed into a corner of a room, let's just say with women, like I was once when I was going to say a Kaddish for a friend in an environment where there was split service, men and women separately, and the women, when they were saying Kaddish, were shushed. We were shushed because they didn't want to be heard, and then their response wasn't counted. So is it enough to say it privately then at all? Why do we need to have a minyan at all anyway then to say these words? Or how do we as women teach others and respond to these websites and respond to these other people in the world that we count as someone to take on the tradition of Lador Vador and to bury someone alone and to say these words alone. So I don't want to say Kaddish quietly from a woman's section personally. I respect others' ways of prayer, but this particular prayer is quite meaningful. So I'm going to read this letter from Henrietta Soltz, who was the founder of Hadassah, and she was a trailblazer for women. And if you don't know her, we'll talk about her a little bit. So. Okay. There we go. There we go. Okay. She wrote in 1916 this following letter. It is impossible for me to find words in which to tell you how deeply I was touched. I'm sorry, let me preface this, but this is a letter to Chaim Peretz. She was asked by him if he could say Kaddish for her mother, for her. Okay, so it's impossible for me to find words in which to tell you how deeply I was touched by your offer to act as Kaddish for my dear mother. I cannot even thank you. It is something that goes beyond thanks. It is beautiful what you have offered to do. I shall never forget it. I love how she opens this letter. You will wonder then that I cannot accept your offer. Perhaps it would be best for me not to try to explain to you in writing, but to wait until I see you to tell you why it is so. I know well and appreciate what you say about the Jewish custom, and Jewish custom is very dear and sacred to me. And yet I cannot ask you to say Kaddish after my mother. The Kaddish means to me that the survivor publicly and markedly manifests his wish and intention to assume the relation to the Jewish community which his parent had, and that so the chain of tradition remains unbroken from generation to generation, each adding its own link. You can do that for the generations of your family. I must do that for the generations of my family. I believe that the elimination of women from such duties was never intended by our law and custom. Women were freed from positive duties when they could not perform them, but not when they could. It was never intended that if they could perform them, their performance of them should not be considered as valuable and valid as when of the male sex performed them. And of the Kaddish, I feel sure this is particularly true. My mother had 8 daughters and no son, and yet never did I hear a word of regret pass the lips of either my mother or my father that one of us was not a son. When my father died, my mother would not permit others to take her daughter's place in saying the Kaddish. And so I am sure I am acting in her spirit when I am moved to decline your offer. But beautiful your offer remains nevertheless, and I repeat, I know full well that it is much more in consonance with a generally accepted Jewish tradition than is my or my family's conception. You understand me, don't you? So I want to ask you, I'm going to slip back to you for a second. What you felt about that letter, and in what ways was Henrietta expressing her need to say these words? This is 1916. Remember, it wasn't, women were saying Kaddish, but alone. They weren't really publicly saying Kaddish. Really, oh, women are fine, they can say Kaddish. But it's not as easy. It's as it seems. And even today, it's not as easy as it seems. We might be in environments or belong to congregations where it's accepted and we count, but what is still going on in people's minds, and is not necessarily the case. So
Can I say something? So
Yes.
it reminded me, when my father died in 1986, so he had 2 daughters, and we lived in a Jewish neighborhood, and my neighbor, who was observant, came over to say Kaddish during Shiva, and there were not 10 men. And she said, "Is it okay if I go out and get some men?" And I said, "In all due respect, we don't need the men. Thank you very, very much. But there are over 10 of us, and we're his daughters and wife, and we count, and thank you." So it was, and then 20 years later, when my mother died, and a Chabad rabbi wanted one night to lead the prayer, he wanted the women in the back of the room. And we said, absolutely, we could say it, but in the back. And I said, you know, it's our mother. And we actually were side by side, totally equal. And he helped us. He was very accepting and helped us. But it's, so that was 1916. I'm talking 2008. And so, yeah.
Okay. I'm really thrilled to hear that flexibility and that, you know, that accommodation or that understanding. And I don't, you know, and we don't know what goes on in the minds of people in terms of what their intention is, but the fact that it made you feel more comforted to know that you could say the words. And then
I have no idea if he thought he would hear my words,
right,
but
exactly.
at that point, I was respectful that he was in our home. So I wasn't, but yeah.
Right. And at that point, you were confident that your own family and the women around you and those who were participating were your response, were your...
Absolutely.
You know,
yes, it was a non-issue.
That for ourselves. We have to start with ourselves being the people to respond to ourselves. We have to be. If we start off in any way where we think that what we say needs, that we have to, you know, I'm going to say, you know, we always worry about what people think about us, you know, how people see us, how people relate to us. But if first, and
the other thing, Rabbi, is as Henrietta Sold said, my mother and my father wanted us counted, to be counted. So it was irrelevant to us, truly, if somebody else didn't want us to be.
Yeah, and I think that the more people like us who believe in ourselves and believe in the importance and the values of ourselves being those, being of value to others, that we have to start there. We have to start there. Deborah, did you have a hand up again? Because
yes, I did. This time I think actually it's probably a more relevant point to tell the story I was going to tell, which is goes back to the last great pandemic in 1918. My grandmother lost her father. He died in that pandemic. She was 7 years old, an only child. And her uncle, her father's brother, died 2 days after her father did, also from the flu in that pandemic. And so her grandfather, father of her father and uncle, brought my then 7-8-year-old grandmother to say Kaddish for her father. And my great grandfather this was in upstate New York, was a very small Jewish community. And he was kind of a leader in that community, seen as sort of adjudicated disputes and that kind of thing within the community. So he was a fairly kind of revered figure in that small town. And he brought my grandmother there to say Kaddish. And the other men were, "What are you bringing a girl over here to say Kaddish?" And he said, I've lost both my sons. There are no men to say Kaddish. And she is going to be the one to say Kaddish, you know, in the future. And so she's here to do that. And that was in 1918, maybe 1919. And then fast forward to the mid-90s, tragically, a young cousin of mine died. And when he passed away, he was just shy of his 15th birthday. And his mother, my cousin, they had the Chabad rabbis come in. This is the mid-90s. And again, the women were sort of shunted to the kitchen area in the back of the room. And I couldn't believe that, the mother of was not allowed or was not welcome to say Kaddish for her own son in that setting. And a couple years after that, I remember King Hussein died of Jordan, and they showed the funeral on TV, and the women, they were taking the body, all these men in the streets in Amman, and they were taking King Hussein, through his funeral procession, and they would flash back on TV, back to the home where his wife and one of his wives, whatever, and the children were in that house. And it just harked back to, I said, this is the same thing that happened when my cousin Elliot died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it comes back again, right? Unfortunately. Karen, are you?
Yeah, how are you?
Hi, Karen, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. Very, very touching for me to be listening to this particular Rosh Chodesh that you're sharing with us. And it was when you brought up the letter that dated back to 1916, and of course Deborah's recount of her grandparents. I just finished reading a book, and it very interesting because it also dates back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and these women were prostitutes and through sex trafficking, not of their own choice. They came from very religious Jewish homes. Religious in the sense that they were Yiddish and they were just Eastern European, and it was their religion, it was their way of life. And and here they are now in South America. And when a woman passed, especially if she was now a prostitute, that nobody would say Kaddish for her. They were not allowed in a cemetery, even though they respected them and buried them in Jewish cemeteries. These women were not even allowed into the cemetery on this, what they consider sacred, which is sacred and holy ground. And they started to form their own as early as 1900. They formed their own groups and said Kaddish for their sisters, sisters, and they were saying Kaddish back then, even if they had to, and they were stealing like books and stuff, which stealing was awful, but then which one meant more, to actually have the prayers and the books and it's just it touches so many lives. And I remember growing up that women never, and when I was at the first Kaddish here, I think it was like 1992, that women were saying Kaddish was like, I was like, wow, we can really do this. I was absolutely astounded, and I never, ever had heard of it. I didn't grow up with it. It was just something you just didn't do. And I think because of our times, and that there just are so many more women and independent and single women with families, and it's just now, since then, it's so much a part of our society that it's a blessing.
Thank you for sharing, Karen. Hi, friend Alice.
I was brought up in a Reform congregation and was very active in it. And we went to services every week. So I learned all of the prayers, kind of knew them by heart. And of course, in Reform, there's no question of whether you're going to say Kaddish if you're a woman. And I remember saying it from the time I was like 8. Once I had learned the prayer, I said it every week. So it's just the difference of how you're brought up.
Right.
And the only time I ever felt something different was I went to Shiva for a friend's parent up in someplace in Palm Beach. And I didn't realize that I was probably the only woman that was saying Kaddish. And one of the men said to me, wow, I'm impressed. You know all the words, you know? And that's the only time that I have felt left out of, you know, not really being a part of it. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. It's if you're brought up in a right. I was one of the first girls to wear a talit at my bat mitzvah. So, and I was was brought up in a conservative synagogue. We all knew the word. I learned words when I was, you know, young. The only thing I learned is that I wasn't supposed to say the Kaddish if both my parents were living, and then my parents are living, thank God. And I still say Kaddish to Morton's Kaddish because I have to help other people. So I use it as well, I have to lead. So I'm not thinking in my mind right now that the Kaddish is for my parents, right? You have to kind of, where do we go when we say these words? And I want to talk a little bit about what you just said, because the beginning of Henrietta's letter was what was the most important part of that letter for me in terms of what it means to be Kadesh, to be holy, or to be the words that you say. I don't know if you remember her introduction, but her introduction, and I'll read it again in terms of how she, well, I think I already, did I exit out of that already? Oh, here it is. There you go. She says, and this is where I think that we can all take what we want, take our goals, take our conviction, take our intention, take the knowledge that we are valuable, and elevate that a little bit. It is impossible for me to find words which to tell you how deeply I was touched by your offer to act as Kaddish for my dear mother. I cannot even thank you. It is something that goes beyond thanks. It is beautiful what you have offered to do. I shall never forget it. Boom. Are you seriously? That is, to me, transformational. That whole setup of, okay, I'm not going to react right now to how frustrated I feel that he thinks that he can take away what I need to do for my parents. I'm going to say, you know, this man was coming from his perspective, from his place, from where he grew up, from what he knows. Not what I believe and what I know, but I'm going to just say to him, I'm going to wrap him in my words of Kadesh. I'm going to say to him my own words of thank you, praise, and peace. She actually said the words of Kaddish with her words of saying thank you to him for actually thinking about that. I think that with all of the extra time that we have, I don't have extra time, but I think I have more moments of time where I have to think. I don't know how that's working out. I'm busier than ever, but for some reason I have more time to think. I don't know why. I don't know. But I think even more so, I'm more concerned with how I react and respond to others in this time of life. Everybody is super, super, super elevated in whatever they're feeling. I feel, you know, how can we even imagine? Maybe there are people here who weren't able to go to a shiva, or were not able to attend a funeral, or were not able to be with people, or who know people who are suffering and can't be with them and to give them a hug. How horrible was it for me to go to an unveiling of where people I care about and not be able to reach out and embrace them physically? So we have to redirect ourselves, and we have to do it with our words, and we have to do it with our actions, and we have to do it with our heart, and we have to go to that place of, this doesn't feel right to me, but what am I doing, and how am I moving on, and how am I being this Kaddish? How am I being that? Where am I taking that to the next level? It's not about just saying the words, even though that's the tradition. This is just something else that popped into my head about Rabbi Yair Bachrach. And he was a man. He wrote of a man from Amsterdam who had no sons, who commanded that upon his death 10 men study in his home, and that following this study, his daughter recite Kaddish every day for 12 months. In his responsum, Rabbi Bachrach concluded that a daughter's Kaddish brings peace and calm to the dead person, but he prohibited the daughter from reciting the Kaddish out of fear of innovation. Thus, Rabbi Bachrach did not assert that it is halachically forbidden for women to recite the Kaddish, but ruled that such an act was not appropriate for his community. So there's where we get around all the semantics, all the words. Okay, well, in this space, right, what does it mean for these people? But in my space, what does it mean for me? And where do we draw the lines, and how do we be inclusive, and how do we move toward that? So there are two basic mitzvot that we have to consider when dealing with or an understanding death. And the two phrases are nichum avelim, comforting mourners, and kevod hamet, honoring the dead. Basically, those are the two areas that we have to provide. Like, we have to put ourselves into those areas. So the words of the Chodesh are a way where we comfort mourners, where we're with them, and we're with them in their moment. And also the ways that we can honor them as well. Honoring the dead are those two things. And I want to know if any other particular rituals or practices that you have that you feel are important to you where you do these acts. How do we comfort mourners today? How do we do it? What do we say? What are our words? Because our words sometimes really aren't helpful. I have someone who writes me, I wish that people didn't say I'm sorry, because what if they doesn't help me? And then you put yourself in Henrietta's position, right? You know, how do we set it up? How do we say what we want to say without offending the person? Because we need to be sensitive. And how do we do it now where we can't really be with one another? I don't know if you've come across this difficulty. Phyllis is, and then Lisa. I don't know if
Okay, so I'm unmuted now. I would say just be there and give the person space and be silent and listen to what they have to say, and also remember the person. If you remember the person of your experiences with that person, and to share it with the person who lost their loved one, I would think that helps them. That helps them.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. Lisa?
So this is unfortunately very real to me right now. I'll try to, I'm glad I'm on mute most of the time, but it is funny because as my family and I have been dealing with a loss recently, we have kind of been almost joking about, like, there's like the different types of people that you encounter in these situations. And you know, there's the, I mean, I think that the one thing that we always come back to is don't give me homework. You know, like, you know, the emails, the texts are always amazing and fantastic. And the expectation, as long as there's no expectation of reciprocity in return. And that was one of the things that we really noticed, is there were a lot of people in our lives who I think really was unexpected, that would reach out and just sort of leave the touch point there without feeling like they needed any sort of response, which was great, because as you can imagine in these times, you know, there's an inundation of people reaching out, which is wonderful, but there is sort of the side on that, on the grievers wondering, like, do I have to respond to this? Like, what's my obligation? Because, like, there's a lot more of you than there are of me, and you know, kind of navigating that has been a really interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm. I think that your comment really hit the nail on the head in terms of my feeling about the words of Chodesh and the needing to respond. That whole concept of, you know, we need our community to support us in the ways that we need to be supported, right? We also have to leave space to understand that people are who they are, and they will say what they say because they need to fill that space. But if we look at the words of the Chodesh and the way the Chodesh is said, that, okay, let's see, okay, so we need a minyan. Let's call the women us, right? We're 10 people. We have to say it. Whether or not rabbis decide that Zoom is perfectly acceptable among all the different denominations, that we can Zoom and be together because we don't want to get each other sick, All right, we want to say prayers of holiness and love and peace and comfort through Zoom. Okay, call it whatever it is. This is a new way of doing it. Let's just say that. And we decide that the words that are responded by those, the Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, the words that we look for, right? That particular line is all we need, let's say. We can, and then we have to say it for ourselves, and then we have to feel that. So when we hear these comments that people, okay, they know that my response isn't needed because I'm the one saying the Kaddish, but they're the ones who just have to be there. That's what I'm listening for. Taking those words, taking that setup and saying, I don't have to be learned to say the Kaddish. I don't, you go back to the history, and the reason why women, weren't involved in the beginning was because the men didn't want to look like they weren't learned. And if we said Birkat Hamazon, women couldn't lead Birkat Hamazon because it would basically say, well, if a woman is doing that, means there's no man around the table smart enough to lead Birkat Hamazon. That's what it was about. The Kaddish isn't about knowledge. The Kaddish is about feeling. It's about the way that we relate to the people that we love and the people around us. So what is the response? What is our response to that? So in your situation, Lisa, I get it. How do we not diss the people we love by not responding to their need to say they're sorry to us? What is that puzzle about? Then saying, okay, I'm going to be Kaddish. I'm going to be in as hurt as I am and as emotional as the situation is. I'm going to say words of thanks, words of praise, and just represent peace. Thank you. I appreciate you. I'll be in touch, right? That's what we want people to also. I love you. I'm here. Sarah Levitin is raising her hand. You're a jitterbug. I'm getting these.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell about how when someone dies or even when someone's sick, before the pandemic, I used to bring them my homemade chicken vegetable soup. I even did it for you.
Delicious, thank you. Something an act like that is something that people tend not to forget.
And I usually do it after all the Shiva food is gone, because when the Shiva's happening, they get so much food.
Right.
Okay.
I didn't know if there's any questions, but I hope that I didn't even go into half the history that I wanted to go into, because I feel very strongly that when we have these prayers that we are privileged to be able to say, because they elevate us and bring us to another level and they bring us together, that we are doing it not because we have to say the words. Like, well, I'm doing this, I need a minyan because this is what I have to do to fulfill the mitzvah, right? But to put ourselves more into the mitzvah itself, because it has so much more meaning for everyone. And in that time where I was standing and saying the words, I couldn't, who am I saying this for? Well, why am I saying this, and who is it helping right now? Who is it touching? So if you have any questions or comments to add, everyone is like either frozen or no questions. I'm going to read you another story.
Okay, I'll do one.
Okay, because I do.
Phyllis had something. Phyllis put her hand up, and then so did Harriet. So
can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
When I said Kaddish for my father, it was 1988. I started learning about the words and what it was really for. But then when my mother died in 2005, I said Kaddish for a year because it really helped me to get back my strength. It was about the belief in God, and that God is watching over. And I just did it for a year, and it was really wonderful for me. So I don't know how they came to a year. I mean, I used to teach bereavement classes all the time, support groups, and there's really no time schedule for bereavement.
Right.
But somehow somebody years and years ago,
Even the story I read about how this, the rabbi taught about the story that the requirement for his, you know, to say the words 12 months, you know, these things come from because people are dealing, the rabbis were dealing with in their own lives. And they had to come up with what they thought was appropriate for fulfilling the needs and the voids and the holes.
well, by the time a year was over, I felt really good. Like I did something for myself and for my mother, that I promised her that I was going to go on, and I had such a great connection and love, and she had a great connection and love for me, and I'm very fortunate about that. But there was something about it that was so powerful that I learned a lot.
Thank you. Harriet?
I can't follow that, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay. I'm going to read you another story that is, for me, is says so much about women and our role in comforting, and our role in honoring the dead, and our role in being holy. This is the story of Bruria and her sons from Midrash Proverbs 31:10. Bruria was the learned and compassionate wife of Rabbi Meir. While Rabbi Meir was teaching on a Shabbat afternoon, both of his sons died from the plague that was affecting their city. When Rabbi Meir returned home, he asked his wife, "Where are our sons?" She handed him the cup for Havdalah, and he said the blessing. Again, he asked, "Where are our sons?" She brought food for him, and he ate. When he had finished eating, Bruria said to her husband, "My teacher, I have a question. A while ago, a man came and deposited something precious in my keeping. Now he has come back to claim what he left. Shall I return to him or not?" And Meir responded, "Is not one who holds a deposit required to return it to its owner?" So she took his hand and led him to where their two children lay. He began to weep, crying, my sons, and she comforted him. The Lord gave, the Lord took. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, may the name of the Lord be blessed. She held his hand. She gave him food. They were her sons. She made it about him. She was comforting. I mean, the story is beyond words, beyond saying. It was something that women have this ability to do, that from deep within us, where we can be so powerful in this world. And I only hope that all of us here are blessed with the ability to take the words that we're not obligated, we're not obligated to, but that we choose to say, that we choose to be, and we make ourselves present as often as we can in minyanim, when people call and they need someone to help them, to help them with their response when they don't know how to respond to themselves, that we become the response for them only with Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, that we become that hand and we become that guide. And we all have the strength to do that and to look beyond these words. So I hope that soon we are able to be present. I think if you go on these Facebook, often cantors and rabbis all across the country right now are posting their Zoom minyanim, their Zoom services. And they do that because they need people to say Kaddish, people. And I would hope that all of us look for those minyanim, wherever it may be, and just join. Zoom in, click on I'm here. We'll see what they say. Be present in their virtual space and respond to their call. Let's keep doing it and keep making changes.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Nancy.
This is Nancy and family. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so very much for leading us today. I'm going to just make a few final announcements or just give you some additional information. Thank you again for leading this beautiful program, Rabbi, today. Our next Rosh Chodesh is on Wednesday, June 17th. That will be led by Rabbi Joanne Loibin. And we have another program tonight at 7 p.m., our second deep dive. Our focus tonight is on reproductive health, rights, and justice. If you attended the Mother's Day event a couple weeks ago, Charo Valero will be speaking, and then she'll be bringing a coalition partner, Samantha Daly, who works for an organization called Power U. That starts at 7 o'clock. And then there's also the national organization has something called Vote Safe digital. It's like a digital action day. It's from 12 to 5. So we missed the beginning of it, but you can still check out information about it. And we have a leadership development program where we're taking applications for our third cohort right now, partially funded by the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. We're really excited for our third year. We had two really, really great groups. Our first year, two of the young women joined our board, and now so now we're going into the third year of that. Applications are due June 15th. So if you know anybody 22 through 45 who would be interested in being a part of this program, that would be great. And that's all I got for now. And just wishing you all well. Please stay safe, be well, and reach out if there's anything that you need. And thank you again, Rabbi, for joining us. And
Filter
discussion today.
Thank you so much. And I want to remind everyone, Yizkor is next week on Shavuot. And for those of you who do Shavuot on day 1 or day 2, when you're in those moments of contemplation and thinking about those that you love, I hope that you can take some of the meaning from today and from each other's stories and put your value into your words on that day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this was recorded,
Thank
so
you so much.
I will share this.
Thank you.
Soon. It was great. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye.